and relatively to similar-sized countries, Scotland exports are under real pressure. Two themes in their First Minister's industrial strategy were to become an independent nation and to rejoin the EU. All the evidence points that that is the correct course of action, doesn't it?
No, it does not, Mr Speaker. Scotland continues to punch above its weight, both in exports and goods and services and foreign direct investment. Mr Speaker, trade is now well above pre-Brexit levels.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. According to the Government's own figures, new Brexit controls will cost the UK £330 million. Wow. Now, businesses in Glasgow are telling me that they're already suffering from increased costs and red tape when they're importing parts and exporting goods. Can the Minister explain to businesses in my constituency of Glasgow North West how Brexit is good for them?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady and the SNP really do have a brass neck speaking about business costs when it comes to their own policy of bringing a hard border at Berwick next to my own constituency. That would risk thousands of jobs and force thousands of companies out of business. It would be the most damaging and reckless economic step. We will work through any short-term issues, but the answer is not the long-term decline as proposed by the SNP.
The former Right Honourable Member for Kingswood and Government Net Zero star said that what business... sorry, six. Yeah, sorry.
Mr Speaker, supporting economic growth in Scotland remains a core priority for the Scotland Office. We are focused on long-term economic growth, generating more jobs and boosting business investment. This is exemplified by investment of up to £372 million in the Scottish Free Port and Investment Zones programme. This is on top of our £1.5 billion worth of investment into growth deals across the whole of Scotland.
As I was saying, the former Right Honourable Member for Kingswood and Government Net Zero star said that what businesses and investors need from the government is certainty, clarity, consistency and continuity. Never has this been more true than in Scotland, where there is huge potential for businesses and communities to flourish as a result of the green transition. But they're not getting the certainty, clarity, consistency and continuity that they need from this government, are they?
Mr Speaker, I don't accept that analysis. The UK has a world-leading ambition to deploy up to 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, for example, with up to 5 gigawatts coming from floating offshore wind. Offshore wind provides secure, domestically generated electricity and will play a key role in decarbonising the UK power system by 2035, achieving net zero by 2050. So I do not share the Honourable Lady's analysis of this government's focus in this area.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister share my frustration that whilst his department's working to support the Scottish economy, the SNP is hitting it with higher taxes and not supporting vital sectors like hospitality and tourism in the way that's happening in England?
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Sadly, the SNP's sole focus seems to be independence, referendums and making Scotland the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. I can see this every day of the week in my own constituency as people are finding it increasingly difficult to justify remaining in Scotland when they're paying so much more tax compared to the rest of the UK by getting less good public services.
We now to Shadow Secretary of State in Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I start by joining the Minister and passing on our condolences to the Secretary of State for the bereavement and his family. Can I also wish everyone a happy Burns Day for tomorrow and thank our wonderful Ayrshire musicians who are in the gallery who treated us to some entertainment last night. Mr Speaker, since this government has been in power, working people have paid on average 10 pence in the pound more in tax. The supposed party of low tax has created the highest tax burden on working people in 70 years, and it makes this the biggest tax-raising parliament since records began. In Scotland, the SNP has looked at this tax burden and said, hold my beer, as everyone earning more than £28,000 pays even more tax than they do in England. What impact does the Minister think this historically high tax burden has on the Scottish economy?
Mr Speaker, well, this government remains focused on reducing the tax burden when it is prudent to do so. But as he identifies, in Scotland we have an additional challenge in terms of the high tax agenda being put forward by the Scottish Government, the SNP, and I share his concerns about the impact that is having on the ability of the Scottish economy to perform at its full potential.
Ian Murray.
Mr Speaker, the Minister seems to think that picking your pocket of £10 and giving you £2 back is something to be grateful for. The fact is that working people all across the country and in Scotland are paying for the Tories crashing the economy. Mr Speaker, we know that the Barnett formula results in an additional £19 billion of public spending into Scotland's economy. But last week, the national newspaper reported that the SNP was being encouraged by their sister party in Wales to join the campaign to ditch the funding formula. 16 years of SNP government has left Scotland's public finances with a £1 billion black hole. We're in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis in generations, yet historically high taxes are already being imposed on working people to pay for this. Losing the Barnett formula would devastate Scotland's public finances and the economy like nothing we've seen before. Will the Minister join me in demanding that the SNP rule out this policy to bin the Barnett formula?
Mr Speaker, the biggest enemy of the Barnett formula and the biggest enemy of devolution in Scotland is the SNP. They want to rip up the devolution settlement and they want to stop the Barnett formula, which results in millions of pounds of extra investment going into Scotland each year. This government, this party remains absolutely committed to devolution and that Barnett formula and more investment into Scotland.
Gregory Campbell.
Number 7.
Mr Speaker, the United Kingdom Government has taken action to make trade between Scotland and Northern Ireland easier. The UK Government is also committed to providing funding to deliver targeted improvements to the A75 road. This will provide better links between Cairn Ryan ferry terminals serving Northern Ireland and South West Scotland, benefiting businesses on both sides of the North Channel.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the reply the Minister has given us. He will understand, like many do, that the economic powerhouse of the United Kingdom is usually centred in the southeast of England and thus to the detriment of the southwest of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Will he do more to ensure that that small 12-mile stretch of water between Scotland and Northern Ireland is bridged in business terms by greater cooperation and expansion opportunities for people on either side of that 12-mile stretch?
Mr Speaker, the honourable member makes a very important point. I fully recognise the very strong links that exist between South West Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the potential to enhance those economic ties are great. Improved transport links are undoubtedly part of that with the A75 and ferry links. I look forward to working with him to see how we might be able to enhance and improve those links moving forward.
The Select Committee Speaker, Shaw.
Speaker, Scottish businesses would give their right arm to have the arrangements that Northern Irish businesses have with their access to the single market and all the competitive advantages that brings. The Prime Minister's described Northern Ireland as one of the world's most exciting economic zones. Does he agree with that? And what's he doing to ensure that Scotland gets the same arrangements?
Mr Speaker, well, I thought the honourable member was going to stand up to tell me how great the House of Lords was now, a bit like his honourable friend, the member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, in a sort of preemptive job application. Mr Speaker, Scotland is not Northern Ireland and does not share the land border with an EU country. It's disappointing the SNP seeking to play party politics with the situation in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, as the SNP well knows, has a unique place in the United Kingdom, and we will protect that.
Alan Smith.
Number 8, sir.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government works tirelessly to promote Scottish interests around the world through our extensive diplomatic network, forging business links and generating trade and investments. Our response to the Scottish Affairs Committee's recent inquiry in Scotland's international position highlights the extensive efforts we undertake to achieve this.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm afraid I don't share the Minister's Panglossian view of this. Would you share my concern that recently published figures which show that in the years 2019 to 21, Scottish exports to the EU fell from 16.95 billion to 14.97 billion.
Whatever the UK government's doing, it's not working. So the Scottish Government has a pressing need to promote ourselves overseas for our economy and our society. Would the Minister not agree that now's the time to increase that overseas promotion, not cut it back on domestic wrangles?
Mr Speaker, given the member's interest in this area, perhaps he could speak with his SNP colleagues in the Scottish Parliament. They are cutting funding to South of Scotland Enterprise, which will mean less support for businesses in the south of Scotland to grow, innovate and export. Perhaps he could tell the First Minister of Scotland that promoting Scotland overseas begins with supporting businesses at home in Scotland.
Jamie Stone.
Number 9, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government recognises the important job that all NHS workers do, including those in the ambulance service. I see this every day of the week in my own constituency in the Scottish Borders. The UK Government would be open to exploring with the Scottish Government how we can work together and share best practice to reduce ambulance waiting times in all parts of the United Kingdom.
Jamie Stone.
Mr Speaker, last year in Scotland, almost 3,000 people had to wait more than 8 hours for an ambulance. But in recent days, women who might have to travel a 2.5-hour drive to Rigmore Hospital in Inverness to give birth or for specialised treatment, they haven't been able to travel at all because the roads have been closed owing to the terrible weather we've had. Does the Minister share my deep anxiety for any woman who lives over 100 miles away from Rigmore Hospital?
Mr Speaker, I share the honourable member's concerns and agree that these long distances are not acceptable, but it tells you all you need to know about the NHS in rural Scotland. NHS Highlands have said that it will need to substantially reduce spend following the SNP government's budget in December. The SNP government is taking a slash and burn approach to the rural NHS across Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
Sir.
Mr Speaker, the autumn statement supported families and set measures to grow the Scottish economy. With a stronger fiscal outlook, the Government has the space to cut taxes for hard-working people and businesses. This is highlighted by cuts to national insurance benefiting 2.4 million people in Scotland, and the extension of full expensing, ensuring the UK has one of the most competitive business tax regimes in the world.
Order, order. Please, don't walk in front of members like that. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister is correct that the autumn statement from this UK Conservative Government provided tax cuts for millions of Scots, provided support for businesses and invested to grow the economy. That was in stark contrast from the SNP's budget last month, which hiked taxes on hard-working Scots, failed to pass on the support to hospitality, retailing and tourism sectors, and has been widely criticised across Scotland. So does the Minister agree, as I do, with Sir Tom Hunter, who said at the weekend that the business community in Scotland doesn't believe the SNP has their back, and that must change?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I agree with my honourable friend, and Sir Tom is right too. Traders in Scotland have accused the SNP government of undermining the rejuvenation of high streets across Scotland with their tax hikes of 6.7% through business rates. The SNP must stop attacking employers and high street traders who are already under tremendous financial strain because of the SNP's mismanagement of Scotland's economy.
Despite devolution rendering it pointless, the budget of the Scotland Office, along with that of the Attorney-General, has jumped by over £3 million since 2018-19, leaping up by £1.2 million just last year, while the Scottish Government's budget allocation suffered a real terms cut. Around 80 people currently work in Queen Elizabeth House alone for the Scotland Office, along with around 30 deluxe civil servants. What on earth are they doing, and how does he justify that to the Scottish taxpayer?
Mr Speaker, the team at the Scotland Office, both in Dover House and in Queen Elizabeth House in Edinburgh, are doing a tremendous job supporting Scotland across the United Kingdom and around the world. I'd be very happy to welcome the Honourable Lady to join me to meet some of them so you can understand more clearly the important work that they do on our behalf across the UK.
That completes Scottish questions. We now come to the Prime Minister, but I just want to announce to the House we are joined today by the President of the Chamber of Deputies of Parliament of the Czech Republic. Welcome. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Richard Thompson.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I know that members from across the House will want to join me in offering our best wishes to His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, this afternoon I shall be meeting the extraordinary 100-year-old Holocaust survivor, Lily Ebert. Lily promised that if she survived Auschwitz, she would tell the world the truth of what happened. Never has such a promise been so profoundly fulfilled. And as we prepare to mark Holocaust Memorial Day on Saturday, I'm sure the whole House will join me in reaffirming our promise to Lily that we will never forget the Holocaust and we will carry forward her life's work for generations to come.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I echo the Prime Minister's comments on World Holocaust Day? My constituents, like all of our constituents, rely on the Royal Mail to deliver important items of mail and packages and for people to run their businesses. So they'll be very alarmed to learn of proposals from Ofcom that Royal Mail might be allowed to cut the number of days that they might be able to, that they will provide that service. Can the Prime Minister give a commitment to me here today that under his watch there will be no reduction in postal services provided by the Royal Mail in Scotland or anywhere else?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree about the importance of the Royal Mail's universal service obligation, and as you will have heard from the Minister this morning, we remain absolutely committed to ensuring that it remains as it is.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Lib Dem-run council in Eastleigh has just received a report from their external auditors warning of the possibility of fraud and ignoring whistleblowers who try to warn them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Lib Dem leaders who shun accountability, shun transparency and simply say "not me, Gov" should start showing some remorse and responsibility or make way for those who will?
Well,
We'll hear the answer. Come on, Prime.
My honourable friend raises an important matter to the people of Eastleigh, which I was pleased to discuss with him on my recent visit to his area, and I know that the contents of the report are deeply concerning. It is disappointing to see this Liberal Democrat-run council rack up debt with absolutely no plan for how to fund it. And the council has been issued with a best value notice, and I know that he is talking to the Department of Levelling Up, who will be monitoring the situation closely.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, and in his comments about Holocaust Memorial Day? Never again must be said more defiantly this year, as it's said every year. Mr. Speaker, last week we lost Sir Tony Lloyd, a true public servant who touched the lives of many people across the House and across the country. And I'm glad that his family were here yesterday to hear the many tributes to and memories of Tony. He will be greatly missed. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's had quite a week, from endlessly fighting with his own MPs to collapsing in laughter when he was asked by a member of the public about NHS waiting lists. So I was glad to hear that he managed to take some time off.
Can I just say, I wanted to the Prime Minister, I'm certainly going to hear the Leader of the Opposition. Those people who don't want to hear, they can certainly leave, because that's how it's going to be, so get it in order. Some of you are wanting to catch my eye again. It's not a good way to do it.
Mr. Speaker, I love this quaint tradition where the more they slag him off behind his back, the louder they cheer in here. Keep it going.
And also, for this side, you can have a joint cup of tea. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, I was glad to see that he managed to get some time off yesterday afternoon to kick back, relax and accidentally record a candid video for Nigel Farage. The only thing missing from that punishing schedule is any sort of governing or leadership. So was he surprised to see one of his own MPs say that he doesn't get what Britain needs and he's not listening to what people want?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about what Britain needs, what Britain wants, what Britain values. This from a man who takes the knee, Mr. Speaker, who wanted to abolish the monarchy, who still doesn't know what a woman is,
just this week, one of his front benchers said that they back teaching divisive white privilege in our schools, Mr. Speaker. Looking at his record, it's crystal clear which one of us doesn't get Britain's values.
Mr. Speaker, he spouts so much nonsense, no wonder they're giving up on him. And even now, as his government crumbles around him and his own MPs point out he's out of touch, got no plan for growth, crime or building houses, the Prime Minister is sticking to his one-man Pollyanna show. Everything's fine. People should be grateful to him. The trouble is, no one's buying it. Does he actually understand why his own MPs say he doesn't understand Britain and that he is an obstacle to recovery?
Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, he calls it nonsense, but these are his positions, Mr. Speaker. Right? And he doesn't want to talk about it, but this is the fact. He chose to represent a now proscribed terrorist group, Mr. Speaker. He chose to campaign against the deportation of foreign national offenders, Mr. Speaker, just like he chose to serve the Right Honourable Member for Islington North, Mr. Speaker. That's his record, those are his values, and that is exactly how he should be judged.
Mr. Speaker, in 2008, I was the Director of Public Prosecution, putting terrorists and murderers in jail. He was making millions betting on the misery of working people during the financial crisis. And we've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos, the longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film. Meanwhile, this week we discover that Britain is going to be the only major economy that no longer makes its own steel. That the government is handing out £500 million to make 3,000 steelworkers redundant. And that the parents of thousands are being told that his free childcare promise is nothing but a mirage. Isn't he embarrassed that the Tory party is yet again entirely focused on itself?
Mr. Speaker, there's yet more sniping from the sidelines. Yeah, you can see exactly why Hizb ut-Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Rain has said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing. Even Labour Party know, Mr. Speaker, he's not a leader, he is a human weather vane.
It's not the sidelines, it's behind him that the fire's coming in, Mr. Speaker. And he can try and blame the Labour Party all he wants. The difference is, I've changed my party, he's bullied by his party. And has he found the time in his busy schedule to work out why thousands of parents are being told by their nurseries that they won't get free childcare that he promised them?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's see what his party is offering the country. Right, so we all know, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have many ideas for our country.
I'm going to hear the Prime Minister.
Well, he doesn't have many, but one thing we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that...
You don't want to push it, do you? No.
Do you know that he's committed to his 2030 decarbonisation promise, Mr. Speaker, which they say will cost £28 billion. But I was reading about it this week. He says he's changed the party. One of his team called it an albatross hanging around their neck. That might have been the Shadow Chancellor, maybe, Mr. Speaker. But he said they're doubling down on it. All this ahead of a crunch meeting, we're told this week, for them to work out how they're going to pay for it. I can save them some time because we all know the answer. Higher taxes for the British people.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that crashed the economy. They're sitting right there, right there. And
Oh, Mr. Holmes, you've had your question already. Obviously, you don't want to remain for the resident. Here's Salma.
He is Mr. 25 tax rises. And he's got nothing to say on childcare. Millions of families will have been listening for an answer, and they got absolutely nothing. He announced that scheme a year ago, claiming it would get 60,000 parents back into work. Only on Monday of this week did he notice there were some, in his words, practical issues with that. 8 weeks before its launch, parents can't budget, plan for work or make arrangements with their employers. And the Prime Minister's response is to say it's all fine, it's the fault of the Labour Party. Is this merely a practical issue, or is it yet another example of him simply not understanding how life works for other people?
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering the biggest ever expansion of childcare in this country's history, Mr. Speaker. But while millions of parents will benefit from that, again, it's right that he should come clean with them about the cost that his plans will impose on all of them. He goes on and on about the Green Promise, Mr. Speaker. He says he wants to keep it. He says he wants to keep it, but he doesn't have a plan to pay for it. What he's really saying is he'll scrap the borrowing associated, but he wants to keep the £28 billion of spending. So, for all those working families who are benefiting from our free childcare, he should come clean with them now. Why doesn't he come clean with them now? Come clean with them now and just be clear. His plans mean back to square one and higher taxes for British people.
Mr. Speaker, making steelworkers redundant and failing to provide childcare is not a plan, Prime Minister. It's a farce. It's a farce. And he may soon discover that with childcare, there's an IT problem. Nurseries haven't got the spaces. They haven't got the staff. There's a black hole in their budget, and it's 8 weeks to go. That isn't a plan. And families across the country, well, they can laugh all they like. Families are making plans now. They laugh at it, of course they do. Families are struggling with a cost of living crisis, trying to work out the household budget, balancing spiralling mortgages, prices and eye-watering bills. And then at the last minute, they're thrown into chaos because their nursery says they can't deliver the free childcare he promised. Now, he calls that a practical issue. But I preferred the honesty of whichever of his colleagues briefed to the Times that it was, and I quote, a complete shit show. Who was it who briefed that to the Times? Hands up. Will the Prime Minister finally realise...
I'll decide how long the question goes. Those who wish don't hear it, I've told you the answer, and I'll help you on the way.
When will the Prime Minister finally realise that the biggest practical issue facing Britain is the constant farcical incompetence of the government that he leads?
Mr. Speaker, another week with no ideas, absolutely no ideas as country, and absolutely no plan. He talked about the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, he talked about the economy, but he never actually brings it up, and we all know why, Mr. Speaker, because things are improving and we are making progress. Wages now rising, Mr. Speaker, debt on track to be reduced, and inflation more than halved from 11% to 4%, because he actually knows that our plan is working and that his £28 billion tax grab will take Britain back to square one. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the choice. It's back to square one and higher taxes with him, or a plan that's delivering a brighter future with the Conservatives.
Changing gear, Mr. Speaker. Too many oligarchs and kleptocrats are living off ill-gotten gains beyond the reach of domestic courts here or in countries like America. Ever since the 2016 London Anti-Corruption Summit, moves to create an international anti-corruption court have been gathering momentum to plug this gap. It already has support from countries like Canada, Holland and Nigeria, and would fund itself from the fines it charged. Will this government take the lead in getting it underway, ending impunity for these crooks once and for all?
Well, can I firstly pay tribute to my honourable friend for his work on this issue? As I'm sure he'll appreciate, establishing a new bespoke institution is a significant endeavour, but I know he's discussed it with the Foreign Secretary, who will look at the proposals in more detail. And in the meantime, as he knows, our Economic Crime Act has a raft of new measures to crack down on dirty money, and we will shortly be publishing our second anti-corruption strategy. We'll set out ambitious plans for combating corruption, both here at home, but also internationally.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, last night, as Tory MPs were once again fighting amongst themselves, the public were sat at home watching John Irvine of ITV News report on footage from Gaza of an unarmed Palestinian man walking under a white flag, being shot and killed by the IDF. Prime Minister, such an act constitutes a war crime, does it not?
Mr. Speaker, we've been absolutely consistent that international humanitarian law should be respected and civilians should be protected. I've made that point expressly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the Foreign Secretary is in the region this week making exactly the same point.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to rise to that dispatch box and tell the people of these Isles and elsewhere that shooting an unarmed man walking under a white flag is a war crime. Now, in recent weeks, this House has acted with urgency and intent following an ITV drama. The question is, will this House now show the same urgency and intent following this ITV news report? And finally, back a ceasefire in Gaza.
Mr. Speaker, no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary, and we do want to see an immediate and sustained humanitarian pause to get more aid in and, crucially, the hostages out, helping create the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire. I set out the conditions for that earlier in the House. The Foreign Secretary is in the region today and will continue to press all our allies and partners to make sure that we can bring about that outcome.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, access to NHS dentistry is a key issue in Ipswich and Suffolk. Locally, actually, we've done something about it. And the University of Suffolk and the local NHS deserve great credit for establishing a new dental centre, which is going to carry 18,000 hours a year of NHS dental appointments. However, a source of great frustration for myself and a number of constituents is that many people who train to be a dentist at university for 5 years and have their training heavily subsidised can immediately go private or actually go abroad without giving anything back to the NHS. It seems wrong to me. Would the Prime Minister support with you of many of my constituents that for say 5 years they work in the NHS, they give something back, and this will make a huge contribution to this problem?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for better dental access in his constituency, and I congratulate him on the new dental centre that's opening, which I know he worked very hard to deliver. And I agree with him. It's right and fair that we seek better value for the significant investment that the taxpayer makes in the education and training of the dental workforce. That's why, as our workforce plan outlined, we are exploring whether a tie-in would ensure that dentists spend a better proportion of their time in the NHS, and we'll be launching a consultation on this policy later this year.
Colm Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the week of the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, people in Derry are watching unarmed Palestinians being gunned down by Israeli soldiers. Over 25,000 people have now been slaughtered in Gaza. The Prime Minister says, and he said it again today, that he wants to see a sustained ceasefire. So my question is a very, very simple one. The next time there's a vote at the UN for a ceasefire, will his representative vote for it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we'll engage with all UN resolutions on their merits, and I've been clear no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than is necessary. We do want to see an immediate pause so we can get aid in and hostages out, because the situation is desperate for many people there. But a sustainable, permanent ceasefire needs to fulfill a set of conditions, including Hamas releasing all of the hostages, Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza with the threat of rocket attacks into Israel, and an agreement in place for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza to provide governance and services. The Foreign Secretary is in the region. Those are the principles on which we are working, and I believe those are shared by all our major allies.
Sherwin.
Mr. Speaker. In 1859, Brunel opened his rail bridge over the River Tamar. In 2022, I met with Network Rail and others to celebrate the agreement to build a simple footbridge going over the railway line in Lostwithiel. That bridge still doesn't exist, and I have no completion date. Can my right honourable friend help?
Well, I know that my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for the footbridge at Lostwithiel station, and I recognise her concerns and the pressing need for the construction of this footbridge. I'm told that Network Rail is currently working on a funding solution for this, so that it can take forward this important project in the next financial year, and the Rail Minister will keep my honourable friend updated on his progress.
Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A report released yesterday by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found that 1 in 4 people in the North East are living in poverty, with the child poverty rate for every local authority in the region higher than the UK average. Too many of our people are being hard hit. Now, the Prime Minister says that his plan is beginning to work. So can I ask the Prime Minister, where does rising child poverty fit in his plan?
Well, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the plan is working because poverty is falling in our country. Since 2010, there are 1.7 million fewer people in poverty, including hundreds of thousands of children. Of course, there's more to do. There's always more to do to make sure children don't grow up in poverty, but that absolutely wouldn't be helped by Labour's £28 billion tax grab on their parents, which would take money out of their families' bank accounts.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, Bracknell Forest is a place of aspiration, opportunity and enterprise. Business occupancy rates and employment figures are thankfully high. Footfall at the Lexicon Shopping Centre is up and wages are up, but the cost of living continues to bite across the UK. What more can be done to put more money in people's pockets?
Well, it's great to see, thanks to my honourable friend, that Bracknell Forest is thriving, with people in work up, footfall in the town centre up, and as he knows, almost 100% of his schools now good or outstanding. But he's right that we must do more to relieve the burden on working people, Mr. Speaker, which is why we cut taxes for tens of millions of people in work earlier this year, worth on average £450. And we've got to stick to the plan for lower taxes, a stronger economy, and a brighter future for the people of Bracknell Forest, and absolutely not risk going back to square one with the Labour Party.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, if everyone had the same good health as the least deprived 10% of the population, in England there would have been a million fewer deaths between 2012 and 2019, and 28,000 fewer deaths in the first year of COVID. These inequalities are not inevitable. Does the Prime Minister think that cuts in social security to 85,000 low-income households, including people in low-paid work in my constituency, will help to address these health inequalities?
Well, I can assure the Honourable Lady that we are committed to caring for society's most vulnerable, and that's why almost 20 million families will see their benefit payments increase this April, which will bring our total support over these few years to around £3,700 per UK household. The Department for Work and Pensions is looking very closely at how it can target its services precisely on the most vulnerable customers, and I know the Honourable Lady spoke to the DWP Permanent Secretary at length about this when he appeared before this Select Committee earlier this month, and I can assure her that he will be writing to the committee on exactly this subject shortly.
Jonathan Lord.
The post office scandal has affected so many people, including my constituent, Seema Misra, a sub-postmaster from West Byfleet with an outstanding record of service to her community, who was wrongfully convicted in 2010 of stealing £75,000 and was sentenced to prison on her first son's birthday and whilst pregnant with her second son. Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and more importantly with Seema Misra herself, who is in the gallery today with her husband Devinder, that she is due a full apology from the Post Office, a full apology from Fujitsu, and proper compensation as a matter of urgency?
And I know my honourable friend has been a great support to his constituents over all the years and has fought relentlessly
for the truth to come out. As I've said, the Horizon scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. We will introduce, as I said a few weeks ago, primary legislation within weeks to ensure that all convictions that were based on erroneous Horizon evidence are quashed. That will clear people's names, deliver justice and ensure swifter access to compensation. Innocent people, like my honourable friend's constituents, have waited far too long, and I'm determined that they receive compensation as swiftly as possible. We have a clear moral duty to right these wrongs, and that is exactly what we will do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2021, 3,527 food parcels were given out by Bulwell and Bestwood Food Bank. Last year, that number exploded to 6,500, with nearly half going to children. The food bank's now having to buy food to supplement donations, which can only be sustained for a short period. Rather than pretending that things are getting better, will the Prime Minister apologise for the daily chaos in government, which is leaving widespread destitution unaddressed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to see anyone reliant on food banks, but while they're in place, I have nothing but praise and thanks for the people who run them. But it is wrong to say that we aren't making progress. When I came into this job, inflation was running at 11%. That is the single biggest impact on families' cost of living. And now, thanks to the efforts of this government, most of them opposed by his party, inflation has now been more than halved at 4%. And we're combining that with significant tax cuts to put more money in people's bank accounts at the end of every month. That's the right way to go about supporting people, combined with our extensive cost of living support for the most vulnerable. And all the statistics show that that support has helped, has made a difference, and that's what you get with responsible management of the British economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November, I held an adjournment debate on the South Fylde line and the need for a passing loop to double its hourly service and increase resilience against delays and cancellations, which again cause misery for travellers over Christmas. The assurances I received from the Rail Minister built on the positivity generated by the reallocation of HS2 funds. Since then, progress has been desperately slow, and my efforts to advance this critical piece of infrastructure for the people of Fylde has been frustrated. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how the government can help to get the South Fylde line back on track?
Prime Minister. My honourable friend is correct that local transport projects are and must be prioritised, and every region of our country will have more transport investment as a result of the decision that we made on HS2. Now, work is underway to consider potential upgrades to the West Coast Main Line, including improvements at Preston Station, which may support additional local services from South Fylde. I know the Rail Minister is carefully considering these options as we speak, and will update my honourable friend in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water are a shambles. In the recent flooding in Oxfordshire, they were dumping sewage from 270 sites along the Thames in 1 week. There was waste backing up into people's homes because of drains that they had not unblocked, and they couldn't even refill their own reservoir because the rivers were too dirty. But rather than offer a rebate for this shoddy service, they are intending to put bills up for everyone by 60%. So will the Prime Minister explain to my constituents why they are being asked to foot the bill for Thames Water's gross incompetence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've been clear that the volume of sewage discharged by water companies is unacceptable, and that's why we've launched the most ambitious storm overflow discharge reduction plan. And we have now achieved monitoring of almost every single storm overflow in England under this and previous governments, and have introduced unlimited penalties on water companies. And where there is evidence of poor performance, the Environment Agency will not hesitate to pursue water companies concerned, just as they did, I believe, a couple of years ago in the Honourable Lady's constituency, where they fined Thames Water specifically £4 million following a serious incident.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Honourable Member for Knowsley and I published our report on TIDE, type 1 diabetes and disordered eating, a condition estimated to affect over a quarter of type 1 diabetics in the UK. It is life-shortening, life-threatening, and can lead to death. I'm pleased to say that Hampshire Integrated Care Board have already responded positively to the report. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government not only looks seriously at the recommendations we have put forward, but acts on those recommendations, which would improve lives, and save money for the NHS?
Can I start by thanking my right honourable friend and indeed the right honourable member for Knowsley for their important work on this issue. Of course, I know both of them speak from personal experience, and as she says, it is important that people get the treatment they need. The Health Secretary will, of course, consider the report, and the NHS has already been piloting services to support those with this condition, as she's aware of, and I understand that the NHS is also now expanding pilot sites to every region of the country so that even more people can benefit from the appropriate integrated care.
Adam Kaiser.
Mr Speaker, we entered 2024 with starvation and famine as acute as ever across the globe, much of it caused by the climate crisis. Yet at present, the world's worst hunger crisis is in Gaza, created by Israel's ongoing siege. The Integrated Food Security Phase classification has found that out of 600,000 people facing starvation globally, 95% of them are in Gaza. Mr Speaker, starvation used as a weapon of war is a war crime. The Israeli government has the power to end this starvation crisis by ending the siege of Gaza and opening all crossings. Does it not, Prime Minister?
Mr Speaker, I've been absolutely clear that we are incredibly concerned about the devastating impact of the situation in Gaza on citizens. That's why we have tripled our humanitarian aid for this financial year to the region, and, as I said in the statement yesterday, are working with partners such as Jordan and the United States to open up new aid corridors so we can increase the supply of aid getting in to those who desperately need it.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This morning, the press reported the tragic case of a 14-year-old girl who took her own life following horrific social media bullying, including on TikTok and Snapchat. Since 2010, across the English-speaking world, there's been a marked increase in poor teen mental health, teen suicide attempts, and children addicted to pornography. The United Kingdom has a strong tradition of legislating to protect children from serious threats to their safety and welfare. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's time to consider banning social media and perhaps even smartphones for under-16s?
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the impact of what happens online on our children, and that's why our Online Safety Act tackles both criminal activity online and protects children from harmful or inappropriate content such as bullying or the promotion of self-harm, accessing pornography and also exposure to eating disorders. Ofcom are now rightly developing and consulting on the guidance and the codes of practices for how those platforms will meet their duties, and if they don't clean up their act, then Ofcom will be able to impose fines of up to 10% of global turnover on the social media firms.
Mr Speaker, recently released documents reveal that the Foreign Office had serious concerns about Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law and its ongoing assault on Gaza. This assessment was hidden from Parliament, whilst the Prime Minister boldly stated his confidence in Israel's respect for international law. Since then, the scale of Israel's war crimes in Gaza have been revealed to the world thanks to South Africa's case to the ICJ. Therefore, is it now not the time for the Prime Minister to admit that he has the blood of thousands of innocent people on his hands, and for him to commit to demanding an immediate ceasefire and an ending of UK's arms trade with Israel?
Mr Speaker, that's the face of the changed Labour Party.
Educational Trust exhibition in Portcullis House and for your personal, unwavering commitment to Holocaust remembrance. Mr Speaker, as we approach Holocaust Memorial Day, will the Prime Minister join me in commending the important work of the Holocaust Educational Trust, in particular their work with Holocaust survivors, who despite living through the darkest moment in human history, continue to share their testimony in the hope of ensuring never again. In the face of the appalling rise in anti-Semitism which we see on the streets of Britain, will my right honourable friend join me in encouraging all members to sign the Book of Commitment and stand up against anti-Semitism?
Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the brilliant work of the Holocaust Educational Trust and thank her for all her work on this issue. I'll be signing the Book of Commitment this afternoon during my meeting with Lily Ebbett, and I encourage members on all sides to do the same and to reaffirm with shared determination to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten and to defeat the resurgence of anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred in our country.
Final question, Sarah Champion.
Mr. Speaker, I represent a proud steel community in Rotherham who stand with the steel workers in Port Talbot at this very worrying time. My constituents don't want to see their taxpayers' money used to make British workers redundant, our primary steel-making capacity decimated and our national security compromised. So will the Prime Minister change his destructive course, starting by looking at the credible multi-union plan to safeguard our steel industry's long-term future?
Mr. Speaker, I know this is an anxious time for steel workers in South Wales, but we are committed to working with the steel sector to secure a positive and sustainable future. The Honourable Lady will know that during the pandemic we provided support to Celsa, a steel company in South Wales, to safeguard jobs and ensure the sustainability of that plant. And what was proposed to happen in South Wales was the loss of 8,000 direct jobs, thousands more across the supply chain, and the complete closure of the plant. Because of the government's investment and support and partnership with Tata, we have safeguarded 5,000 direct jobs, thousands more in the supply chain, and ensured the long-term sustainability of that steel plant so it has a brighter future. Obviously, this is difficult, but it's entirely churlish of her not to recognise the largest support package. It is one of the largest support packages that any government has provided any company, and in the process safeguarded thousands of jobs.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Please let the chamber clear.
Quietly, please. Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. To ask the Minister if he'll make a statement on resilience in light of recent extreme weather events, including Storm Isha and Storm Jocelyn.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. First, I would like to say how sorry the government was to hear that 4 people sadly lost their life due to Storm Isha, 2 in this country and 2 in Ireland. And I'd like to extend my sympathy to their family and friends. And at the same time, praise our emergency and utility workers who have worked so hard in some very difficult conditions in order to help the public. Forecasters at the Met Office raised a rare whole-country weather warning for the wind over the weekend in preparation for Storm Isha. The warning encompassed even rarer amber and red warnings for wind in the areas forecast to experience the worst of the storm. Indeed, wind gusts reached a peak of 99 miles per hour in Northumberland and 124 miles an hour across the Cairngorms. Although the storm had the potential to be extremely destructive, the vast majority of the transport and power infrastructure stood up well and recovered quickly. And that's a credit to the resilience of our critical infrastructure and the response capabilities of our operational partners on the ground. Storm Isha was closely followed by Storm Jocelyn, which reached a peak of 97 miles an hour, which I'm informed was the 10th named storm to impact our country this season. Again, the impacts from Jocelyn in England were less than feared, though operational partners were working around the clock to clear any disruption on our transport and power networks. The forecasting capabilities of our experts in the Met Office and the accuracy and speed at which they can warn and inform the public of incoming severe weather events does, in no doubt, save lives and protect our homes and businesses. My officials and those across government, working hard last week and over the weekend to coordinate the extensive preparation and mitigation measures being taken across the government. The fact that no escalation to a Cobra-level response was required for either storm is testament to our effective response structures at local and national levels. I'm very grateful for the response from colleagues in the devolved administrations and also local resilience forums around the country. Our local authority and agency partners kept public services running and reacted to any local issues that emerged. So we are adapting to weather events not previously experienced in our country, and events such as these come with increasing frequency and severity. The UK is driving forward cross-government action to respond to climate risks and their impacts on our economy and way of life. Our third National Adaptation Programme, published in July last year, sets out an ambitious 5-year programme of work driven by 3 themes: action, information and coordination. We are ensuring a more integrated approach to climate adaptation over the next 5 years through stronger governance, engagement and coordinated policy making. As part of this, we've established the right governance structures not only to monitor progress, but to tackle strategic cross-cutting challenges which will drive the UK's resilience to climate change. This is all in line with the government's broader strategy as set out in the resilience framework, which committed us to strengthening the links between our understanding of the risks that the UK faces and the action we take to prevent those risks from materialising. We must continue to drive forward these initiatives that help us curb the impacts of climate change and at the same time build systems that help us withstand extreme events as they arise.
Shadow Minister Pat McCann.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for his response. Recent days have seen the UK battered by 2 severe storms, first Storm Isha and then Storm Jocelyn. This is the 10th named storm of the winter. And Liz Bentley, the Chief Executive of the Royal Meteorological Society, has said that these storms are some of the worst in the last 10 years. Our constituents around the country have been hit by widespread damage, flooding, power outages, cancellation of flights, ferries and trains. And in the most tragic circumstances, a reported 4 people have lost their lives. I want to pay tribute to the emergency service workers, electrical engineers and other response teams who've been working to help people restore power and get transport moving, often at risk to themselves in very severe conditions. We owe them all a debt of thanks. Now, of course, ministers can't control the weather. Indeed, the ex-ministers on the benches opposite can't even control themselves. But the greater regularity and severity of extreme weather demands a response from government. So let me ask the Minister, in terms of resilience, given the frequency of extreme weather events, why doesn't the government have a standing flood resilience task force as part of the COBRA system with a specific responsibility to build up long-term protection? Local resilience forums have been neglected since the passing of the Civil Contingencies Act under the Labour government. What more can ministers do to revive them and make sure they're properly supported? And last week, the Public Accounts Committee said that the flood protection budget put in place has been underused since it was announced and is now expected to cover 40% fewer properties than was first claimed. This leaves over 200,000 homes vulnerable to flooding. What is the government's plan for them? Jocelyn may be the latest storm, but it won't be the last. And the very least that the public has a right to expect is that the government understands this and is focused on the job and not whatever is the latest episode in the Tory psychodrama that has distracted governance of the country for far too long.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his warm words about our emergency services and utility workers. And on his specific point about flooding, he'll have heard DEFRA, who are responsible for this, comment earlier in the week that flooding resilience in England is a priority for DEFRA as part of a whole society approach to resilience outlined in the UK Government Resilience Framework. For example, the government is investing a record £5.2 billion in the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Capital Programme. Since 2021, over £1.5 billion has so far been invested in flood defence projects across England, with over 67,000 properties better protected. Now, of course, Response to flooding is just one part of our resilience work that is coordinated by Cabinet Office, and mercifully in the storms that we've just had, very, very few families were flooded out of their homes, but we're absolutely cognizant of the need to prepare. I mean, he will have seen, I hope, the NAO report published late last year, noting positively that since 2021, government has strengthened the arrangements to manage national risks, that it's taken steps to address extreme weather risks as whole system risks, and I'll return to that point in a moment, and that it's acquired good forecasting data for droughts, heat waves and storms. Now, what we've seen over the past few years is a noticeable improvement in storm preparedness and response. And if we remember Storm Arwen a few years ago, after 3 days, there were still about 40,000 people without power. Now, these storms that we've just had, which are very powerful, about 400,000 people lost 400,000 people lost power to their homes, but 99% of them had power restored within 24 hours. And that is as a result of the planning and preparedness that this government has put in place. And that's because we've learned the lessons. We now have improved public warnings, we have hardened infrastructure, and crucially, we forward deploy repair experts. So when we see storms forming over the Atlantic, we signal to local partners in utilities, partners in the emergency services, and they go out and get ready on the ground. And that can be everything from clearing storm drains to being ready to repair infrastructure that might be vulnerable. We have better public information. Public is much more connected with the activity of storms. Naming storms may seem like a superficial change, but actually we know that it has improved public awareness of what's going on. We have better travel advice, much clearer, DFT doing great work through our operators. But also, Mr. Chair, we have superior forecasting. The government has invested a great deal in compute capacity and forecasting capacity that enables us to see where storms are coming. So this better coordination and better deployment of resources from the centre is meaning that we are working better with partners on the ground and getting better response when these extreme events take place.
John. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and take this opportunity to thank his officials in the Cabinet Office that do so much that is often unseen. But for those who perhaps have a little bit more of a public profile, would he join me in thanking the Environment Agency emergency response teams for the West Midlands, the Shropshire Fire and Rescue teams that have done such a great job, and indeed Severn Trent Water and all the officials in Shropshire Council and Telford and Wrekin Council. He mentions national infrastructure. Does he agree with me that highways can fall under that? And would he call upon Highways England to do more to ensure that the M54, an important road in Shropshire and connecting Wales and England, has less flooding in the future, and they put more mitigation and investment into doing that?
I absolutely join him in his words of praise for those who've been working in the West Midlands, and I'm sure that my colleagues in DFT have heard what he said about the critical roads in his constituency.
Kirsty Blackwood.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do think it's a little bit cheeky for the government to take entire responsibility for the improvements, given the improvements that I know that SSE have put in place, for example. They have done a huge amount of work and deserve credit for that work, not just the changes to forecasting, for example. I'd like to thank the resilience partnerships that are in place, the emergency services, the energy companies, and also all of those individuals that stepped up to help and assist others in their local communities. It truly was a community effort and people came together. I do wish the government would take climate change more seriously, given the incredible amount of extreme weather events that we are seeing right now. It is important for the government to both talk the talk and walk the walk when it comes to climate change, and they should be leading from the front in developing, for example, a strategy that will help to ensure that we are resilient in the face of climate adaptation and the changes that are happening, and also to put the funding in place to ensure that that strategy can be delivered. Would they also consider that in terms of some of the changes that are required, the Scottish Government does need funding for resilience? If we do have a situation where there's a massive geographical disparity in some of the weather events that are happening, particularly Arwen, for example, then Barnet may not be the appropriate method in order to fund some of these things, and it might be sensible for the government to consider with the upcoming budget process, ensuring that the resilience funding is spread to the areas which are most likely to be hardest hit, rather than having Scotland just have a percentage share based on our population numbers, a percentage share based on the likelihood of extreme climate events, particularly when it comes to resilience, would be most welcome.
Well, it's a classic question from the SNP, isn't it? Didn't listen to what I previously said, and it asked for more money. And I have to say that the central government's absolutely not taking all of the credit for everything that's happened. Yeah, as she'll have heard me say just now, it's our partnership with people who work in emergency services, local government, utilities companies, and so on that have made these changes possible. On climate change, I'm sure she'll be pleased to discover that that since peak CO2 emission in the mid-70s, the UK government, by its actions, has helped reduce CO2 emissions by more than 50%, more than any other G7 country. So we absolutely take these things seriously, and we will continue to do so.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and the Government for their clear actions to strengthen our nation's resilience. As these extreme storms again unleash damage right across the UK, will my honourable friend join me in sending our thoughts to the people affected, homes, businesses, farms, and in paying tribute to the Environment Agency staff, emergency services, local authorities, electricity companies and volunteer groups like the Appleby Emergency Response Group in my constituency, who do so much to help people and communities through the trauma and aftermath of storms and severe floods.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that, and very happy to join him in paying tribute to the Appleby Emergency Response Team. And it is so often local community organisations that both have the connections and the awareness and the intel on what's going on the ground that make response possible. So very, very happy to join with him in that, and glad to hear that although his constituency, I know, was hit by the storms hard, they've managed to move on from it quickly.
Karen Smith.
Speaker. My friend from the front bench from Wolverhampton South East asked the Minister about why the government had neglected local resilience forums and the Civil Contingencies Act legislation, most notably in COVID when that was bypassed. So can I re-ask that question? What now lessons has the government learnt from COVID and these issues in order to give greater sustainability to those local resilience forums that need to protect us?
Well, we have obviously learnt a great many lessons from COVID, and there's been, as the Honourable Lady I'm sure will be aware from the documentation that the government's published over the past couple of years, been a great deal of activity to improve our resilience and our response to emergencies. And my colleague, Deputy Prime Minister, gave a statement to that effect in this House in December. The Cabinet Office assigns ownership of acute national risks to lead government departments across risk identification and risk assessment, prevention, resilience, preparation, emergency response and recovery. Though the lead government departments may change between these phases, the impact changes and different competencies are required. But the UK has adopted a bottom-up approach to manage emergencies, as most emergencies affect local areas. We have local responders, such as the police, fire and ambulance services, which manage them without direct involvement from the government. Response to larger scale emergencies is then led by lead government departments, and it's only in the most serious cases that is escalated to Cabinet Office briefing rooms, known as COBRA, which brings in senior ministers from across government. But as the Honourable Lady will have heard me say, it's very much a partnership between centre and locality, and we're starting to see the benefits of that.
Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask my honourable friend to congratulate the good people of Repton and the other villages that came together to help with all the flooding that was going on, and particularly having follow-up meetings now to get more flood wardens across South Derbyshire. The flooding in South Derbyshire, I've never seen anything like it. And we need to get the Environment Agency to move on with plans for holding ponds further up the Trent and the Derwent to stop the runoff from the fields that we've had this time round. And anything that my honourable friend can do to help me get those projects actually spades in the ground, I've been much appreciated.
Thanks, sir. And I very much hear what my honourable friend is saying, and I know that my colleagues in DEFRA will have heard likewise, and she will have heard what I had to say earlier about their position on flooding. In this instance, we, in terms of alerts, normal flood warnings were operated. We didn't use the national alert because it didn't reach the threshold, and our local partners didn't ask us to use it. But from what we can see at this stage, that local system worked well and helped protect people and, where possible, property.
Thank you very
much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The consistent floods, the consistent storms that we've had this winter have meant that our communities have felt more consistently battered by flooding and winds than perhaps ever before. And sadly, as he mentioned, this past weekend, lives were lost. There are also tens of thousands of houses and businesses without power. Transport links were halted. My own constituency of Edinburgh, there were no flights out of the airport, there were no trains going anywhere, roads, bridges were closed. Thousands of homes were flooded. And yet, the National Audit Office has warned that the government has not set a long-term target for the level of flood resilience it expects to achieve, and there are no concrete plans beyond 2026. That could mean that any investment is misplaced and isn't actually efficient or protects homes sufficiently. So does the Minister see that this could be a lack of foresight, and will the government commit to reversing current cuts to flood protection and do more to ensure that investment is effective?
Well, the honourable lady will have heard what I said, reflecting what DEFRA had said earlier in the week about the £5.2 billion worth of investment in flood and coastal erosion risk management through their capital programme, and the fact that since 2021 the government has put £1.5 billion in flood defence projects across England. And to her first point about the level of disruption, we absolutely understand and sympathise with people who who've been put in this situation. And whilst we cannot control the weather, we can, by degrees, become better prepared for those events, both by the general resilience planning that government has been doing, but also, as I was saying, by having better intelligence on storms that are forming over the Atlantic, and making sure that we have the right people with the right skills poised to act quickly when these storms strike. Yeah. And that, of course, means that we can minimise disruption to the public, even though we cannot eliminate it altogether.
Henry.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of Broxtowe, some businesses and homes that I have visited have been affected by multiple storms and have received the flood recovery grant. But as it stands, those who have been affected by both Storm Babette and Storm Henk can only claim after one of the floods. So is the government looking at putting further support in place for individuals who have been flooded multiple times by these separate storms?
My honourable friend raises a very important question. We know how awful it can be for families to be flooded out of their homes. The damage to property and effects, and sometimes to items with sentimental value. And it's very important that we have processes and procedures in place to make sure that we can help people out in those circumstances. On his specific point, I will make sure that he gets a response from colleagues in DEFRA.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. During Scottish Questions, I spoke of how Caithness and North Sutherland was completely cut off. All the roads in and out were blocked during the storms. So a pregnant mum couldn't even begin to start on her journey when her contractions start, the 100-mile journey to Raigmore in Inverness to give birth. Now, people speak of the helicopter ambulance. There's one based in Inverness, but if that has to go to an emergency in Loch Harbour on the other side of Scotland, then what does the pregnant mum do? To be quite honest, we're faced with a mum dying, a child dying. So when the Minister meets with the Scottish Government, would he please point out the utter folly of centralising these services in Inverness when we've got a perfectly good workable hospital in Wick which should be upgraded and put into full use?
Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to communicate that message strongly to the devolved administration, and I'm I've visited Caithness and I've seen its remote beauty, but yes, one can only imagine what it would be like to be a young woman, giving birth and cut off from major services. So I feel that his plea for the upgrade at Wick is very important.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his statement. 2 weeks ago, Runnymede and Weybridge was flooded as a result of Storm Henk. And when flooding happens locally, my constituents have to navigate a whole host of different organisations with responsibilities, including Surrey Fire and Rescue, Surrey County Council, Runnymede Borough Council, Elmbridge Borough Council, Thames Water, Affinity Water, the Environment Agency, and Surrey Highways. And as part of my campaign to improve flood response and preparedness and protection from flooding, I've been calling for a local flood control centre to be a single coordinated access point for accessible support and advice and for clear and consistent communication. Would he meet with me to discuss it?
I'm glad to hear that my honourable friend has such a worthy campaign to support his constituents, and I'll make sure that his request for a meeting goes to the most appropriate minister who may be able to advise him on how possible it is.
Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. According to the NAO, the Environment Agency has cut its forecast for the number of additional properties that will be better protected from flooding by 2027 by 40% since plans were first unveiled in 2020. In Feltham and Heston, also, the level of water in our streets in storms unable to drain away is getting noticeably higher and higher. So I have to push the Minister on this. Could he explain how he is confident that his plans are going to be sufficient to keep homes and businesses safe in the future from flood-related damage, and that this is the case across the country, because this is a huge and growing concern?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question, and she'll have heard me say a moment ago that the NAO was pleased that the government was taking steps to address extreme weather as part of a whole system approach, and that whole system approach can have real advantages when floods are coming. For example, to be able to send out emergency workers, appropriately trained emergency workers, to clear storm drains and make sure that anything that might make the floods worse are cleared out of the way. She'll also have heard me say that DEFRA has committed a great deal of money to improving flood defences over the past 3 or 4 years, and that we have tens of thousands of homes better protected as a result. We're absolutely not complacent, and we're always looking at ways in which we can improve that.
Kent Malthouse.
Thank you, sir. Can I welcome the Minister's statement and also the excellent work by the team at the Cabinet Office, who I know work extremely hard on these problems. As he will know, my constituency is home to some of our most precious chalk streams and winterbournes, and I'm sure he's aware that levels in the Bourne Valley and to the west of Andover, in villages there, are extremely, perilously even, high. This is particularly important because he will understand the ecological importance of these rivers and the risk of dilution, if you like, or overwhelming of the sewage system and leaking into the chalk streams. The Environment Agency and Southern Water are doing great work. There's a huge pumping operation underway to avoid that calamity. However, further significant rainfall may overwhelm the entire system. So when the Minister comes to the post-match analysis, once the weather calms down, will he give consideration to putting special priority on identifying work that is required in those areas that are of particular ecological sensitivity? There has been significant work up and down my constituency over the last 10 years by the Flood Resilience Group, by the Southern Water and the EA, and indeed riparian owners, but more could still be done, and it needs a certain amount of concentration.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his observations. I know as a former resident of 70 Whitehall, he understands these problems in great depth. And I also know that the chalk streams of Hampshire have no finer defender than his right honourable self. But the point he makes is a serious one about ecological sensitivity. And it's quite right that we pay attention not only to the immediate threats to life or to property, but also to our natural environment, because, as we know, if we don't do that, the damage can be irreparable and long-lasting.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, there was barely a part of Oxford West and Abingdon that wasn't affected by floods recently, but Abingdon remains unprotected. In 2007, we were promised a plan, and that plan was cut because of a lack of resources for the EA. But it's not just the River Thames, it's also the runoff from the new developments coming off the huge numbers of houses that have been built. So what is the Cabinet Office doing to connect DEFRA with the Department for Levelling Up so that the developers who have promised to clear the culverts actually have that enforced by the local authorities?
Thank the Honourable Lady for her question. And as she will have heard me say earlier, the Cabinet Office has a coordinating role which brings together lead government departments and local responders, and so it would be under that guise that different government departments would meet and discuss issues of the sort that she describes.
Alistair Carmichael.
Mr Deputy Speaker, even by the standards of what we are accustomed to in the Northern Isles, the last few days and the week, in fact, have been exceptionally disruptive. So can I associate myself with those who have already expressed their gratitude to the road staff, the electricity engineers and others who have gone about their job, and also those who are doing it even if it's not part of their job, the responsive farmers who just get a bucket on the front of the tractor and get on with the clearing of the snow has been quite phenomenal. But is this not a moment to pause and reflect that some of the changes that are proposed in other parts of government could in fact weaken our resilience? The switch off of the copper wire network for telephones, the idea of increasing the response time for the search and rescue helicopter provided by the Coast Guard from 15 to 60 minutes. These are all things which will leave us in a worse position in the future if they are allowed to happen. Can the Cabinet Office do something to make sure they don't?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I've landed at Tingwall Airport in a storm in the summer, and that was frightening enough for me. And, so one can only imagine what it felt like in the Shetlands over the past week or so. So my sympathies with his constituents. To his point about general resilience, the government, as I say, is trying to take a whole system approach to really understand exactly how we can work with those who are responsible as emergency responders, but also responsible for our national infrastructure. And as I say, I know that we are making progress, but there are obviously always areas in which we can do more work.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Deputy Speaker, as both the Minister and the Shadow Minister pointed out, this is the latest in a series of storms that we faced. And back in October, St Andrews Harbour was significantly damaged as a result of the sea surges following Storm Babette. Now, it's run by a trust that dates from James VI of Scotland's granting of the land to the people of the town. But as a result of the community ownership fund that the government has run, and other funds generally, more and more of our assets are being owned and run by local communities who, when faced with this kind of disaster, have no source of funding in order to be able to access support. So does the government agree that they should be looking at ensuring that there is funding in place? Because for St Andrews Harbour, it's a working harbour, it's facing £3 million of costs, and without those repairs being made, there's the risk to other parts of the town being affected in future.
I've learnt something I did not know about St Andrews Harbour this morning, and I'm very pleased to have learnt it. But yes, I'm sure that colleagues in other government departments, including DLUC, are considering these very issues. But community-owned assets can be a wonderful thing, and it's very important that assets such as local ports are governed by people who really understand the towns and cities in which they're based. So I'm happy to take that forward.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his responses. Positive answers to the questions that were put forward. Farmers tell me in my constituency they can never ever recall floods and rain quite like it, and they tell me it's been of biblical proportions. So I'm very conscious of the fact of that volume of rain. Hailing as I do from a coastal constituency of Strangford, storms hit with a fury possibly not fully grasped. The coastline defences around Strangford Lock and within my constituency have been subjected to a level of onslaught never before seen. Can the Minister confirm the interventions and the discussions with the Department of Storming, ever mindful, Minister, that in the past this place, Westminster, gave substantial help financially to the department at Stormont to address coastal erosion? So with that in mind, what have been the discussions and what help that's been given in the past can be given the same level of assistance perhaps be offered again? Thank you.
I will ask ministers from other government departments to come back to him on the specifics, but obviously, as my honourable friend will know, we are very keen to see a restoration of Stormont, and I believe that the House will hear more about that very soon.
Deputy Speaker, Somerset is so often battered by extreme flooding, and in response, the River Cam flood warning system is currently being piloted in my constituency. So a stretch near North Cadbury will be fitted out tomorrow with laser depth measuring devices that will send real-time messages and alerts to residents when the water levels start to rise. Will the Minister join me in congratulating Liberal Democrat councillors and Somerset Rivers Authority for this initiative, and agree with me that we need to fund more extreme weather resilience plans for isolated rural communities?
I'm delighted to hear about this initiative in Cadbury. I have very fond memories as a schoolboy of walking around the hill fort there, and I'm well aware of the historic threats that Somerset has faced to flooding, and I'm glad that in recent instances, local government and central government have been able to work together for the benefit of people who live in the area.
That concludes the urgent question. Point of order, Sir Liam Fox.
Mr Deputy Speaker, an organisation in my constituency where I had grounds to intervene on behalf of a previous pub tenant has issued its current tenant with a gagging order and verbally told them not to contact their MP. Mr Deputy Speaker, what can be done to protect my constituents from such bullying and ensure that their constitutional rights are respected?
Well, first, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving notice of his point of order. Constituents' ability to communicate with their Members of Parliament is constitutionally important. I'm concerned, very concerned, about the matter that he's raised. Constituents must be able to communicate freely with their Members of Parliament, and I trust and hope that urgent action will be taken to clarify that this is understood by all parties in this case. If the matter is not resolved satisfactorily, then I trust that the Right Honourable Gentleman will seek advice from the Clerk of the Journals, in the first instance, about how this very important issue might be escalated. Presentation of Bill, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill.
Second reading what day?
Today.
Order. I advise the House that this is a very narrow bill. If the House agrees the business of the House motion today, then amendments may be tabled before the bill has been read a second time. I understand that the Chairman of Ways and Means has indicated that she will make her provisional selection of amendments soon after 2 p.m. Members who are considering tabling amendments are asked to contact the Public Bill Office as soon as possible. Presentation of Bill, Mary Robinson.
Whistleblowing Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 2nd of February.
Friday, the 2nd of February. Kit Malthouse.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about speeding offences on roads to which a 20-mile-an-hour limit applies, to make provision about the enforcement of moving traffic offences, to require 24-hour staffing on works on specified public roads, and for connected purposes. As I'm sure you're aware, Mr Deputy Speaker, life as a motorist has changed very significantly over the last 2 decades. Cars have become safer, more efficient, greener and quieter. And yet, despite the fact that the motor car is possibly one of the greatest contributors to human wealth, happiness and freedom, it has become seen by many as the root of all evil. Despite the enormous benefits that cars bring to our constituents, families up and down the land and indeed across the world, for many motorists, the world seems to be filled with councillors and officials dedicated to making their lives more difficult. Driving is becoming a minefield of potential traps and penalties, such that drivers are becoming paranoid and resentful about the entire system. When this happens, order tends to break down, and time, I believe, has come for a rebalancing. In this bill, therefore, Mr Deputy Speaker, I propose 3 modest measures which will achieve a better balance and I hope see better results generally for motorists and members of our communities across the board. First of all, I propose that anybody caught speeding between 20 miles an hour and 30 miles an hour does not receive penalty points. Rather, they would be required to attend a speed awareness course, and repeat offences would require repeat attendance at speed awareness courses. And I should declare an interest, having been myself at a speed awareness course recently, caught doing 24 miles an hour on the embankment unwittingly, along with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Not at the same time or in the same vehicle, but he was also done for a similar offence. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the rollout of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits across the country has brought benefits in terms of road safety, but it has left many thousands of drivers disproportionately punished for straying over the limit. That you can receive 3 penalty points for doing 24 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone and for doing 57 miles an hour in a 50-mile-an-hour zone seems unfair to many and is in danger of discrediting the system. In addition to penalty points and a fine, drivers so punished will also face higher insurance premiums at a time when premiums are rising significantly in any event. As it stands, it's possible to lose your driving licence by driving at 24 miles an hour 4 times in 3 years. 2 years ago, it was revealed that as 20 miles an hour rolled out across London, Transport for London was setting a target of 1 million speeding fines a year with the Met Police. This represents a huge increase in prosecutions and the accumulation of points. Analysis of DFT data by claims.co.uk confirms that of those speeding in a 20-mile-an-hour zone, 49% were exceeding the limit by 5 miles an hour or more, only 19% were driving above 30 miles an hour, and these numbers, of course, imply that 51% of those caught speeding were doing less than 25 miles an hour. In evaluations, Mr Deputy Speaker, speed awareness courses have proven to be significantly more effective in preventing reoffending than penalty points and a fine. If our objective is to improve road safety, particularly on residential roads, then it would be more effective to put people through repeated courses, perhaps with increasing intensity and time required. This would be a more proportionate approach and achieve better road safety. Points, of course, would still apply for those who fail to attend courses or indeed who fail their courses, which I understand is a possibility. The second element of the bill, Mr Deputy Speaker, is for non-speeding traffic offences enforced by a local council or body other than the police. A first offence in these circumstances, in my view, at a particular location, should result in a warning letter rather than a fine. A subsequent offence at the same location would attract a fine in the normal manner. Now, over the last few years, we've seen a significant increase in the number of traffic enforcement cameras operated by local authorities. In London alone, over nearly 3.2 million tickets were issued in 22-23, extracting something like £200 million from motorists. The number of councils approved by the government to operate enforcement this way has increased steadily. There are regular reports in the media of the earnings of particular cameras. The most successful in Birmingham pulls in apparently £10,000 a day from drivers straying into a bus lane. A number of councils who have introduced enforcement cameras have started with a grace period, during which erring drivers have been issued with a warning letter for their first offence at a particular location, recognising that a sudden change may not be immediately appreciated by many. In Liverpool, the city of my birth, when cameras were brought in at one particular location, 1,400 drivers were caught out within the first 24 hours. Happily, they all received a warning letter first. This is a good and civilised principle and maintains public support for the enforcement system. It recognises that the vast majority of drivers will have made a genuine error, will learn their lesson and won't make the same mistake again. This very British sense of giving people the benefit of the doubt should continue, and this bill would make it a permanent feature. Anyone who commits a moving traffic offence caught in the yellow box, stray in a bus lane, turn left when you shouldn't, enforced by a local authority with a camera for the first time at a particular location, would only receive a warning letter. Subsequent offences at the same location would attract a fine in the normal manner. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, the third element of my bill is that it says that any roadworks on an A road should not be left unattended at any time. Now, the government, as we all know as members of Parliament travelling around our constituencies and to and from London, has struggled to control and minimise disruptive roadworks. Anyone who drives in any major city, in fact, will tell you that unannounced roadworks with poor traffic management and inconsiderate positioning is a source of huge delay and aggravation. Even more so when those works are seemingly abandoned and lifeless, sometimes for days. Even in the last few days, Hyde Park Corner, one of the busiest junctions in the capital, has been beset with works and temporary traffic lights with not a soul in sight after 5 p.m. There is at the moment a polite government consultation out at the moment on increasing fines and tinkering a bit with the current system. My right honourable friend, the member for Rayleigh and Wickford, introduced the 10-minute rule bill last year with imaginative and more radical measures to address the same problem. His Can the Cones campaign hit the mark with many. But my proposal, Mr Deputy Speaker, is simpler and would simply require contractors to ensure that no roadworks on any A road can ever be left unattended. Someone must always be on hand to deal with problems, speak to the public, alert authorities of traffic issues and generally manage the site. This obligation would also provide a powerful incentive for the works to be completed swiftly, and the duty could be satisfied by having at least one person always working on the site. A very efficient use of resources, and one which would show the public that contractors are being as diligent as possible and that works are being completed as swiftly as possible. Above all, motorists would know that their safe and smooth passage through the works was being supervised at all times. Mr Deputy Speaker, I hope that these three simple measures would improve all our lives with greater road safety, a greater sense of proportion and civilisation, if you like, in the enforcement of non-speeding traffic offences, and less aggravation for motorists going through abandoned streetworks.
The question is that the right honourable gentleman have